In the Victorian era, Britain changed as never before. It was the time of great inventors, great engineers, but above all, great businessmen, entrepreneurs. And one of the best examples was the pioneer photographer, Francis Frith. It was in the 1860s that Francis Frith embarked upon a monumental mission using the newly invented photographic camera. He wanted to document every city, every town, and every village in the land. I'm tracing the footsteps of this remarkable man and his team of photographers. Using their pictures as my guide, I'll be travelling the length and breadth of the country, finding out what has altered and what has stayed the same. And along the way, I'll be taking my own photos to try and capture the mood of the place as it is now.
That's great.
Welcome to Britain's first photo album. The subject matter of Frith's photos were the British Isles, the towns, the resorts, the industrial landscape, and, of course, the people. Frith realised there was a big demand for pictures of places that people were visiting, perhaps for the first time. These early tourists wanted mementos, and he was happy to oblige. Inspired by Frith, I'm travelling around the country, and today I'm continuing along the south coast, from Lyme Regis, heading up through the West Country to Exeter and Barnstable. I'll be trying my hand at a spot of heavy horse farming. I think I'm a natural. Visiting the mysterious dungeons of Exeter's Guildhall. What a grim place. And, of course, in true Frith style, making my own record of life in the UK. I think a smile of satisfaction. We begin in the beautiful county of Dorset. Frith and his team extensively photographed the towns and villages, producing a vivid snapshot of Victorian life. Our first photo was taken in Lyme Regis, an ancient seaport whose origins can be traced back hundreds of years. Lyme Regis, one of the prettiest towns in Britain. It's the capital of what's called the Jurassic Coast. And there's the Cobb, that's the breakwater with its heavy stones, which enabled the town to become a great port. And now it attracts visitors from all over the world. And what makes this area so special are the millions of fossils preserved in the layers of limestone that make up this extraordinary coastline. Frith took lots of pictures of Lyme Regis, but they were particularly concerned about capturing the most exciting thing about Lyme Regis for the Victorians, which was the fact that this is where the fossils came from. So these amateur paleontologists came from all over the country, desperate to have a look at these fossils, and they hoped to discover a new dinosaur. So the picture we've chosen is of the fossil depot. And here we see the proprietor, we see lots of bric-a-brac in the windows, we don't know what that is, but this fossil depot wasn't just any old depot, no, it had a royal patron, HRH Prince Alfred, the son of Queen Victoria. Well, my first job is to find out exactly where the picture was taken, and that's not easy. Oh, this looks promising. Hello.
Hello.
I wonder if you can help me.
Maybe.
Where is that?
That, unfortunately, is no longer there. That was out on the Dawnton right, just on the end of where the Rock Point pub used to be.
Blast! Wrong fossil shop. There are so many round here. But it seems the one in our photo disappeared in 1913 as part of a road widening scheme. Well, this is where the old fossil depot was, but it was demolished, and what we've now got is a pub. I can't find the building, but what I can do is to do what lots of people do who come to Lyme Regis. I can go and look for a fossil. Fossil hunting has been popular in Lyme Regis since the early 19th century. Chris Andrew is an expert on finding fossils, and he shows others how to do it. Right, tell me what I'm looking for.
Right, basically all the sort of grey-coloured rocks you can see, they're all parts of the blue lias, the same rocks you can see in the cliffs over there. And the most common fossil we see is ammonites. You can find loose belemnites in among the rocks. You know, you'll find all kinds of things as we go along.
OK, what about this?
Right, what we've got here, we've got a small ammonite.
I found a fossil.
Oh, yeah, found a fossil?
What about anywhere else? Oh, look, what over there, yeah? OK.
So when I said there's fossils, people always want to know if you can find fossils at Lyme. You can always find fossils. There's always things to be found here. This is the ammonite graveyard, or the ammonite pavement, and this is a sort of a famous tourist attraction around Lyme. And you can see just the whole surface of the limestone absolutely covered in ammonites. There's an absolutely lovely ammonite.
And how old is that?
About 200 million years old.
Right, OK.
Geologically, not that old, but
Oh,
you know,
no.
it's still fairly impressive.
Right, and you bought something with
I bought a
this to
few
show.
bits and pieces to show you, yeah. If we go back to the ammonites, now, I said to you originally, ammonites, people always see the coily shells, and they always think they're some sort of snail. They're not snails, much more interesting than snails. They're related to squids and octopuses, and if you know about it, the modern-day nautilus. And the front of the animal, tentacles for catching his prey, and we think ammonites had well-developed eyes. Their body was only in about the outer half coil, and all the middle part of the shell was divided up into little gas-filled chambers, and the animal controls the amount of gas and water in each chamber, and he can move up and down in the sea. But it means when he dies, sinks the sea floor, all his soft parts rot away, and mud washes into the outer part of the shell, but all these chamber walls stop it going into the middle. So the outer part fills with mud and is well preserved. As more mud piles up, the centre collapses. And what we end up with is what we have down here, a semicircle full of mud and very little in the middle.
Now, what else have you got?
That's part of an ichthyosaur jawbone, and what you've got here, that's the nostril, got the skull, or the bones of the skull, the jaw coming along here, lower jaw here, teeth all the way along.
So it's sort of, wait a minute, it's sort of like that. That's
like that, and that's your nostril here, and the eye would have been much bigger on this side.
Particularly good specimen.
That's a nice specimen. It's a lovely piece. And
yeah,
the
it's
nice
heavy.
thing about it, yeah, that's the fool's gold in it. The nice thing about it is that it hasn't been cleaned. That's how it was picked up on the beach.
I'm really chuffed to have found those fossils. But there's still one mystery from the Frith picture that I've not solved. It's this strange object proudly displayed in front of the fossil depot. Up at the museum, I'm hoping local historian Ken will be able to shed some light.
Of course, this museum's been here for nearly 100 years.
And is it all about fossils?
No, we're very strong on fossils, but we've got quite a lot of other history in Lyme Regis as well.
And you're going to tell me, I hope, about this particular photograph. And what's this thing in front of the shop?
That's the shoulder bone of a whale. And if you look down there, we still got it.
Hey presto, there we are, revealed.
It was found amongst the rocks by one of the Curtis family, who were fishermen. And one of the Curtis families had that shop, and he displayed the whalebone outside of it. When the shop was pulled down in 1913, they kept the whalebone in the family. It was inherited by a distant relative of mine about 12, 14 years ago, and he's actually loaned it to the museum.
Well, but you must be proud of this.
Oh,
Family
yeah,
heirloom. So that's the final piece of the jigsaw. Frith and his team were anxious to capture some of the mystery and magic of Lyme Regis. I'm now going back to the beach to do the same in our modern times. OK, so when I say go, you remove
I will very gently move back, yeah.
I hope that stays there, otherwise...
I hope that stays there as well, or my colleague will kill me.
OK, all right, expensive fossil ruined.
Yeah.
OK, take your hand off.
There we go.
Here is my picture of the Ichthyosaurus fossil, perched precariously on top of some stones. It's extraordinary to think that 200 million years ago, this little dinosaur would have been happily swimming around right here. The Frith picture I'm interested in next is also taken in Lyme Regis on the banks of the River Lyme. This is the industrial part of Lyme. When this was taken, there were about 13 mills in this area. So you can see the interest of this picture is that the River Lyme, which Lyme Regis gets its name from, is going down here, but this is the water that comes down here to turn the mill wheel. So it's a very interesting old picture of how, for hundreds of years, Lyme was a centre for milling. And local historian Martin Randall Green will show me where the picture was taken. We're going to try and...
Well, I think that building there on the left, with three windows, is that building there. Next building's the same, and then at the end is a thatch building, which was the Angel Inn. That red tiled building is the Angel, well, it was the Angel pub until it closed a few months ago. And the jetted building on the right, you can see there.
So actually an enormous amount of this is still here, although it looks completely different, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, what went wrong? Why did the whole industry collapse?
It was about the end of the 19th century. Grain came in from Canada. There were roller mills built at the ports, and little town mills were struggling by that time. But there is one mill left, the town mill, which is the only working watermill in Lyme. It ground to a halt in 1927, but...
Only in 1927?
Yes.
Yeah, so not that long ago, there was a mill here.
Yeah.
The town mill dates back to 1340. Recently it was saved and restored by local volunteers. It was and still is a flour mill. Steve White, one of the current millers, is going to teach me the ancient art of producing stone-ground flour.
OK then, John, what we're now going to do is take some wheat and put it into this wooden hopper, this wooden box here.
Right, OK. So, it's heavy, isn't it? Oh,
yeah.
OK, that goes in there. The mill is still powered in exactly the same way as it always was, by a big water wheel turned by the mill stream.
Now, as you can see, there's lots of water in the wheel, but it isn't turning. So what we need to do is walk the wheel. Put your foot in there for me, please, onto the stone.
Put my foot in it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
right.
Push your foot forward, time and time again.
Ooh. OK, it's going.
And that will be starting to turn the water wheel. OK, I think that's enough. Now...
All right. Oh, it's starting, isn't it?
Yep.
OK.
And what's happening now is the wheat is being knocked into the middle of the stone. The stones are milling it finer and finer, and eventually the flour will be coming out around the edge. But those two stones in there don't actually touch one another. The entire weight of the top stone is supported on a shaft and a bearing that goes down to the floor below. There's an adjustment which gives you your quality of flour.
How fine the flour is.
Absolutely. If you adjust it so that the quality is too fine and the two stones touch together, they bind together and you grind to a halt.
That's where the phrase comes from.
Yes, it's an old milling term that we all use.
So there's my flour coming down the spout. All I've got to do now is to weigh it and bag it. Oh, wait a minute, that's right, isn't it?
Good.
Right, and there is...
One bag of stone ground, wholemeal, organic, brown, plain, traditionally ground flour.
Which I have ground.
Indeed you did.
It's time for my photo. I want to concentrate on the man behind the mill. Steve White keeps the wheels turning, and he's my hero. I think a smile of satisfaction. OK? Are you ready? Great. Pride in the past. That's what really matters at the new and old mill here in Lyme Regis. This is the Frith picture of the old industrial part of Lyme Regis, which the tourists wouldn't normally have seen. And this is my picture of what the tourists now do see in Lyme, which is, of course, the old mill and the miller, Steve. And it's interesting that when he started his career, it was as an engineer, and he just likes being near old machines. I'm travelling across the country to tell the story of Britain's first photo album, tracing the footsteps of pioneer photographer Francis Frith and his team. I'm moving on to Exeter, the county town of Devon. The picture which interests me is of Exeter High Street, taken in 1896. What makes the photo more poignant is that this city was badly damaged by German air raids in the Second World War. A quarter of Exeter was destroyed by the bombing. But some very good buildings still remain in Exeter, and particularly the one that I'm interested in, which is the Guildhall, and that's where I'm going. Even 120 years ago, when this photo was taken, the Guildhall stood out as a reminder of an earlier age. Historian Todd Gray gives me a glimpse of its fascinating history. Hello.
Very nice to meet you.
And you're going to tell me about this wonderful building?
Well, it's the oldest serving Guildhall in the country. It's an extraordinarily rich building, and it's one which the city loves.
So how old is the building that we can see in front of us?
Well, the front bit's 1590s. There's been a little bit of repair, but not much, because Exeter didn't have much money in the 19th century. So we kept basically what we had, and this is why it's so important. We can see what it's always been like.
It is how it's been for hundreds of years.
Yeah. It's always looked like this.
Looks very grand at the moment. A Guildhall was the meeting place of the trade associations known as guilds. The Exeter Guildhall has been a town hall, a police station and a prison. But perhaps its most interesting role was that of a court, where harsh punishments were meted out in the 17th century. One of the judges became a byword for cruelty.
Well, Judge Jeffreys comes down to basically stop a great insurrection. And
so he's the notorious, horrible judge.
He's still a hate figure.
He's the worst, most frightening judge that's ever worked in Britain.
Well, supposedly he had medical issues which made him a bit grumpier than normal.
But he'd be up here, and this would be the court.
This is the court. The prisoners come in from behind us. They get arraigned on the left. Judge sits down, and then he pronounces some sort of awful punishment for crime.
So he would say, you will be hanged by the neck until you're dead. Grim. Yeah. And what would be the most trivial offence that you might be hung for?
Stealing a sheep would instantly be a death sentence unless they were transported.
And what were the public thinking at the time? What were the town leaders thinking?
Well, you have to remember there's very loose political control. There's hardly any police anywhere. So the state is very supportive of a structure which intimidates people into behaving.
Exeter Guildhall has a comprehensive archive dating back 800 years. It contains some fascinating descriptions of cases tried here.
This particular one I think you're going to love. This year, the mayor was much troubled after the punishment of one Joan Luther, who we go on to read is a very strumpet and harlot.
And what year is this?
This is 1524.
Right, now what happens to her?
Her followers do not agree that she should go to jail, so they attack the mayor.
And why don't they think she should go to jail?
She's too beautiful.
Perfectly good reason. And where do they take her?
Well, at this time, there's one place which was then called the pit, and we would say is a dungeon.
Prisoners such as Joan Luther would have had a hard time at the Guildhall. The dreadful dungeon, or pit as it was known, was used to incarcerate the prisoners. I'm only visiting, but you can quickly get the idea.
It's charming, isn't it?
What a grim place.
Well, it hasn't been used for some time. It hasn't been used for a few hundred years for this purpose.
Yeah.
And hardly anyone goes down here. You can see why.
Yeah.
But at the time, you know, we know people are down here for, well, 40 days, 40 nights.
These would be cells, would they?
Well, if you're a violent prisoner, you were manacled.
Yeah.
Down here, and if you weren't, you were just allowed to, well, walk around as much as you can.
It's just so powerful, isn't it? You come here and you think, I can imagine it. I don't think I could do very well in these conditions. And this would be another cell. It's the mustiness, the damp that's so grim, isn't it?
Well, if you can imagine the sewerage from the streets just sort of seeping down in and coming up from the earthen floor as well.
And a lot of the time, the prisoners here would be in complete darkness, wouldn't they?
Yeah, there's a tiny little grate above to let in a bit of light, but that's it.
Right, so let's switch off our torches and it... God, Let's just get some feeling for it here, don't you?
Nightmarish.
This is nightmarish. Oh, horrible, isn't it? Just the idea that you'd be stuck here for so long.
And you think night after night after night. Terrifying.
Not a nightmare. Yeah. Well, I think I've seen enough, I've heard enough. I want to escape. I want to go back to the light. Well, that's a relief to be out of there and taking my picture of Exeter High Street. I'm trying to do something along the lines of the Frith photograph, and that's the theory of photography, really. You draw the eye in along the road, you start on this building, which is interesting, and where does it go to? So there's a bit of moving from left to right. Anyway, that's my excuse. This is the moment. And there it is, the old Guildhall, still standing, moody and magnificent. Exeter's modern prosperity is based on the coming of the railways, and when the railway came, built by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, an MP stood up in the House of Commons and said, "This morning I was in Exeter." And a thrill went through the chamber to think that someone could travel so quickly between Exeter and London. So what's my take on Exeter? Well, we've got the Frith photograph, which we've talked about. Very nice photograph. I'm trying to better it. Mine isn't, I don't think it's good. But you can see all the detail. And what is astonishing, once again, in one of these photographs, really how much remains. The key point, the Guildhall, the lovely Guildhall is there, given lots of prominence by me. And as in the Frith picture, we're talking about a real scene. These people are walking about, they're doing their business as they were in the old photograph. But it's a rather handsome picture. Why? Because it's got a very handsome building in the middle of it. I'm now leaving the busy streets of Exeter and heading just a few miles away into the Devon countryside. My final Frith photo was taken in the farmland just outside Barnstable. This is a very typical Devon road with these sunken roads and great big bushes on both sides. My mother used to live near here for about 20 years, and I was brought up in the countryside, so it always gives me just a bit of a thrill to say we're going to the real country and we're going to a real farm. Jonathan Waterer runs a heritage farm that uses heavy horses and traditional machines to work the land, just as they did in Victorian times. This is a photograph by the Victorian photographer Frith.
Yes.
Now, this is agricultural life in the late 19th century.
Sure.
Now, a lot of this you're familiar with, aren't you?
Yes. I mean, until 2 or 3 years ago, we used hay tedders, just a little bit more modern than that, but exactly the same idea, exactly the same machine, and we used them for years and years.
What do you think about the horse, though? He doesn't, to be honest, he's nothing like as healthy as yours to look at.
Well, what we've got to remember is years ago, when people were really working horses, they were a machine to them. Times were hard, they had to make money, and horses probably didn't get quite the feed, or if they did, they certainly worked very hard.
But you get the impression from this photograph that the person taking the photograph wants to say, isn't the country wonderful? Now, there's an element of that, isn't there? You know, when we're here, you can sort of think, townies like I am now,
sure.
You sort of think, oh, isn't it wonderful?
When I'm on my own and it's pouring with rain and I've got to get dung out or whatever, there's quite an element of worry.
So it's tough in paradise?
Yeah, it is.
Look, we've got to get on with muck spreading.
That's it.
Right, OK.
Right.
That's pretty tough. Or it's not exactly romantic, is it?
Well, I suppose it isn't really, no. That's it. Just got to be done, hasn't it?
Well, let's get on, OK.
Now, I've got a very antique tractor here. You have to excuse the look of it, but it does operate.
OK.
And we'll load this up.
Jonathan isn't averse to using some more modern equipment to help him manage his 90-acre farm. By the end of the 18th century, the agricultural revolution in Britain was well underway. It was spurred on by the increase in the population, by mechanisation and by crop rotation. The sun shone and the farmers made hay.
Whoa!
boys.
Right, well done. What, in the photograph, the Frith photograph, what are they doing there? What time of year is it?
OK, it's probably June. They would be haymaking.
All right, now what are we going to do this afternoon?
OK, well, we're going to spread some manure dung onto the field here to help make the grass grow.
OK, but in Victorian times, as it were, some months after that photograph,
Yes.
they would have been doing the same thing.
That's right.
This is exactly the same process.
Exactly. There's nothing different.
As they
at all.
would have done.
Absolutely the same.
Yeah.
You know, we might have all big tractors and so on today, but it's all the same process, just in a modern way, and this is an in-between modern way. Bob, Sam, go on, get on. Sam, get on. Good boys, go on.
By the time of the Frith photograph, Victorian manufacturers had designed an enormous range of horse-drawn agricultural machinery, from ploughs and cultivators to rakes and manure spreaders. All these were used until tractors largely replaced horses in the 1930s. Now, all that would be understandable for a Victorian farmer, but what would he find surprising?
Well, of course, if he came back today, the countryside's empty, isn't it? There are so few people working in the countryside or on farms. You know, this farm's, what, 90 acres? There have probably been 3 or 4 people working on this farm in Victorian times.
People have gone to the town.
They have.
Yeah.
They have.
The country's sort of empty in a way.
It is, sadly. Yeah, sadly.
Well, I think it's time for me to take the reins. After all, I was brought up in the country. I think I'm a natural. Come on, boys. How do we stop them?
Do you want to stop yet?
No, you carry on. But
No, we'll go down
when
to
we
the
have
end.
to stop them, how are we going to stop them?
I'll tell them to whoa eventually.
Tell
Keep
them to
going,
whoa,
boys.
OK. There is something very special about life on a farm, and I can see exactly what drew the Frith photographer to take his picture of a similar scene all those years ago. OK. The happy farmer. Wait a minute. That's very good, with some lovely happy horses. My picture is, in a way, like the old Frith picture. It's a townies version of life in the country. And in the Victorian picture, you can see that most people here are in the town. But there are still the people in the countryside, and it's bathed in sunlight. But we know that life was hard on the farm. And I'm trying to get across the same idea in my picture. Yes, we've got some lovely sunshine here. We could have taken it right there in the sunshine, but I didn't. I wanted to show that there was a darker side to life in the country, that it can also be very hard. So that's my picture. Good old Jonathan, lovely horses, but it's not a simple view of paradise. Next time, my journey continues into Wales and canal country. I venture deep underneath the Forest of Dean. Well, this is something, isn't it? This is a magnificent cave. And I find out how Sunday school began and what the kids of Gloucester think about it today. And would you like to go to Sunday school?
No, not really.
Next on BBC Two, Jim's being framed in the Rockford Files.